This is Spacetime, Series 27, Episode 28. Coming up on Spacetime, the Odysseus lunar lander placed into sleeping mode on the Moon. A new study warns the Atlantic Ocean could start to disappear in the next 20 million years. And 3 new moons discovered orbiting around Neptune and Uranus. All that and more coming up on Spacetime.
Welcome to Spacetime with Stuart Gary.
Intuitive machines say they'll place their Odysseus Nova C lunar lander into sleeping mode in the hope of waiting out the 15 Earth Day-long lunar night following the spacecraft's sideways touchdown last week near the lunar South Pole. The historic mission's been labelled a success by both the company and NASA. That's despite multiple communications and navigations problems, which ultimately saw the spacecraft flip over onto its side during its landing sequence. It turns out Odysseus was descending 3 times faster than expected, and it was moving slightly to one side at the moment of touchdown. And that was enough to cause one of its 6 legs to catch onto the lunar surface just as it was about to make contact with the ground, resulting in the spacecraft tipping over onto its side by about 30 degrees. Odysseus wound up landing in the Moon's Schomburger crater. That's some 200 kilometres uprange from its intended landing site in Malaport A crater, 300 kilometres from the lunar South Pole. Still, it was the first lunar touchdown by any commercially manufactured and operated spacecraft, and the first moon landing by an American spacecraft in 52 years. Only 4 other countries have successfully landed on the Moon: the former Soviet Union, China, India, and most recently Japan in January, although that also landed on its side following a propulsion system malfunction during touchdown. Mission managers say while Odysseus' solar panels were able to keep batteries running successfully, they weren't in an ideal position due to the way the spacecraft tipped over during the landing. And they're not sure if the spacecraft's batteries will survive the freezing lunar nighttime temperatures. Odysseus is carrying a suite of 7 NASA science and technology demonstrator payloads. They're designed to improve operations around the lunar South Pole in preparations for manned Artemis missions, which will see humans returning to the Moon for the first time since Apollo 17 back in 1972. But unlike Apollo, which only saw lunar visits lasting a matter of hours or days at most, Artemis marks the commencement of a long-term human presence on the lunar surface, more like scientists overwintering in Antarctica. And they'll eventually use the Moon as a jumping-off point for longer manned missions to Mars and beyond. The various payloads aboard Odysseus include collecting data on space weather interactions with the lunar surface, a radio astronomy test, laser retroreflectors for range finding and identification, the use of microgravity fuel tank gauges, monitoring radio wave interference on the Moon, checking out the amount of damage caused to the lunar surface during landing, and developing a lunar navigation network. That involves the Navigation Doppler LiDAR, an innovative new type of guidance system. Navigation Doppler LiDAR Chief Engineer Glenn Hines from NASA's Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia, says the system's been under development for some 20 years now, and it can potentially revolutionize landing spacecraft on extraterrestrial worlds. See, the problem is previous attempts using radar are inherently imprecise. That's because radio waves cover a large area of the ground at once. That means smaller obstacles like craters and boulders can be missed, and that can cause unexpected hazards for a landing craft. Hines says the landers needed the radar sensor to tell them how far they were off the ground and how fast they were moving towards it, so they could time their landing accurately. The problem is radio waves can't measure velocity and range independently of one another. On the other hand, LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, is a technology that uses visible or infrared light in the same way that radar uses radio waves. LiDAR works by sending laser pulses to a target, which then reflects some of that light back to a detector. As the instrument moves in relation to its target, the change in the Doppler effect frequency of the returning signal allows LiDAR to measure velocity directly and precisely, and distance is measured based on the travel time of the light to the target and back. So overall, LiDAR offers a more precise and accurate measurement than radar. As well as navigation Doppler LiDAR, the team have also developed a companion sensor known as a multifunctional flash LiDAR camera. Flash LiDAR basically uses 3D camera technology which surveys the surrounding terrain, even in complete darkness, thereby providing a complete picture of what lies ahead. This report from NASA TV.
When the Artemis program takes humans back to the moon, we want to do everything we can to ensure that they land there safely and get to return home. My name is Glenn Hines, and I'm the Chief Engineer for Navigation Doppler LiDAR, or NDL for short. So the Artemis program is taking NASA back to the moon, and everything that goes there, including the instruments and people, must be flown there safely and landed there precisely. So the landing phase of that task is one of the most critical aspects of it. NDL is a LiDAR instrument that is used to enable that capability. It uses light in the same way that sonar uses sound. For NDL, we have 3 telescopes where light would come out of the telescope, hit the moon's surface, and some of that light would be reflected back. These telescopes are mounted on the outside of a vehicle so you get a clear view of the ground as it's coming in for a landing. In the Apollo era, large radars or astronauts using their eyes looking out of a viewport were used to help land the vehicles. NDL is going to have to take the burden off of the crew with a much smaller, lower power, and more accurate instrument.
And in that report from NASA TV, we heard from Navigation Doppler LiDAR Chief Engineer Glenn Hines from NASA's Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia. This is Space Time. Still to come, a new study claims the Atlantic Ocean could start to disappear in as little as 20 million years from now, and 3 new moons have been discovered orbiting Neptune and Uranus. All that and more still to come on Space Time. A new study suggests the Atlantic Ocean may soon be entering its declining phase. The findings, reported in the journal Geology, are based on new computational models which predict that a subduction zone currently below the Straits of Gibraltar will ultimately propagate further inside the Atlantic Ocean, contributing to the ultimate formation of an Atlantic subduction system, basically an Atlantic Ocean version of the Pacific's Ring of Fire. And the study also suggests that, based on what scientists are now seeing, this will happen soon in geological terms, in just 20 million years or so. The oceans seem eternal in human lifespans. But on the overall geological timescale of planet Earth, they're not really around for very long. They're born, they grow, and they eventually close up again. This process, which on average takes a few 100 million years, is known as the Wilson cycle. The Atlantic Ocean, for example, was born when Pangaea broke up 180 million years ago, and it will one day close. For example, what we now call the Mediterranean Sea is all that remains of what was once a huge ocean, the Tethys. It existed between Africa and Eurasia, but now the Med's all we've got. For an ocean like the Atlantic to stop growing and start closing, new subduction zones, places where one tectonic plate sinks below another, have to form. But subduction zones are actually quite hard to form, and they require plates to break and bend, and tectonic plates are very strong. A way out of this paradox is to consider that subduction zones can migrate from one dying ocean in which they already exist, in this case the Mediterranean, moving into a pristine ocean, like the Atlantic. And this study shows for the first time how such an event can happen. A computational gravity-driven 3D model predicts that a subduction zone currently below the Strait of Gibraltar will propagate further inside the Atlantic and contribute to the ultimate formation of an Atlantic subduction zone. The study's lead author, Wade Arate from the University of Lisbon, says he was able to simulate the formation of a Gibraltar arc with great detail and also how it may evolve in the deep future. These findings shed new light on the Gibraltar subduction zone, as few scientists considered it to still be active because it significantly slowed down over the past million years. Now, according to these new results, this slow phase will last for another 20 million years or so, and after that, it will invade the Atlantic Ocean and accelerate. That will be the beginning of a recycling of the crust on the eastern side of the Atlantic, and it might be the start of the Atlantic Ocean itself beginning to close. And our story doesn't end there. It seems there are two other subduction zones on the other side of the Atlantic, the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean and the Scotia Arc near Antarctica. And both of these invaded the Atlantic several million years ago. Studying Gibraltar, therefore, provides an invaluable opportunity for scientists because it allows them to observe the process during its early stages when it's all just beginning. Durate says the study shows that subduction invasion is likely a common mechanism for subduction initiation in Atlantic-type oceans, and it plays a fundamental role in the geological evolution of the entire planet. Finding that the Gibraltar subduction is still currently active also has important implications for seismic activity in the area. Subduction zones are known for producing very strong earthquakes. A repeat of events such as the 1755 Great Lisbon earthquake pose a real threat, and so they require several preparedness. This is Space-Time. Still to come, 3 new moons discovered orbiting around Uranus and Neptune, and later in the science report, marine archaeologists have solved the 120-year-old mystery of the SS Nemesis. All that and more still to come on Space-Time. Astronomers have discovered 3 tiny moons orbiting around the ice giants Uranus and Neptune. The trio include 2 new bodies orbiting Neptune, bringing its total moon population to 16. The new Neptunian moons have been provisionally named S2002N5 and S2021N1. N5 is some 23 kilometres across and appears to be on a 9 Earth-year orbit around Neptune. The fainter moon, N1, is around 14 kilometres across, and it circles Neptune once every 27 Earth years. Both Neptunian moons will eventually be assigned permanent names based on sea gods and nymphs out of Greek mythology. Meanwhile, the third moon, which was discovered orbiting Uranus, is just 8 kilometres across, and takes some 680 Earth days to complete each orbit. It brings the total number of known moons orbiting around Uranus to 28. These 3 new moons are the faintest ever found orbiting around the 2 ice giants using ground-based telescopes. This is Space-Time. And time now to take a brief look at some of the other stories making news in science this week with the Science Report. A new study claims zinc could help some people with cystic fibrosis. Researchers found that in people with CF, immune cells called macrophages are defective in a zinc pathway that the body uses to kill bacteria. A report in the Journal of Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences says this may partially explain why these people are more susceptible to bacterial infections. The authors also identified a zinc transport protein that can restore the macrophage's ability to kill bacteria. The goal now is to deliver the zinc transport protein to macrophages in people with CF with the expectation that this might reactivate their immune response and therefore reduce infections. An investigation by the CSIRO for Heritage New South Wales has solved the 120-year-old maritime mystery of the SS Nemesis. The 73-metre iron-hulled steamship was lost off Australia's Pacific East coast in 1904. Nemesis had been on a voyage from Newcastle to Melbourne carrying coal and coke when it disappeared in a storm with the loss of all 32 souls on board. Its location was unknown until marine survey company Subsea discovered an uncharted wreck off the coast of Wollongong back in May 2022. An initial inspection by Subsea using a remotely operated subsurface vehicle suggested that it might be Nemesis. And so Australia's National Science Agency, the CSIRO, was petitioned by Heritage New South Wales to investigate the wreck and garner further information in order to aid in its identification. The agency's research vessel Investigator undertook a detailed seafloor mapping and camera investigation of the wreck using advanced multi-beam echo sounders to first map the wreck site and surrounding seafloor in high resolution. They then conducted a systematic visual inspection of the entire wreck using a special underwater drop camera system. The seafloor mapping shows the wrecks lying in 160 metres of water, approximately 28 kilometres off the Wollongong coast. The wreck is sitting upright on the seafloor and it's located right near the edge of the continental shelf. The images show that Nemesis has suffered significant damage over the years, and deterioration at both the bow and stern is quite extensive. But some key features were still intact and identifiable, including two of the ship's anchors lying on the seafloor. A new study has failed to find any clear link between the weather and back, knee or hip pain. The findings, reported in the journal Seminars in Arthritis and Rheumatism, contradict the long-standing belief that changes in weather conditions, such as impending rain, humidity or temperature change, can trigger or worsen muscle and joint pain or arthritis. However, an extensive study by scientists at the University of Sydney have failed to find any clear pattern between these two events. Researchers did find that high temperatures and low humidity may double the risk of gout flare, with the findings showing that warm weather could lead to dehydration and increased uric acid concentration in people with gout. The authors pooled the data from existing international studies on weather and musculoskeletal pain involving over 15,000 participants, reporting over 28,000 new episodes or worsening of muscle or joint pain. Knee or hip osteoarthritis were the most common conditions reported, followed by lower back pain and rheumatoid arthritis. The study found that changes in air temperature, air humidity, pressure and rainfall do not seem to increase the risk of knee, hip or lower back pain symptoms and are not associated with any new care-seeking events for arthritis. The village of Amityville on Long Island has a rich and robust history. But unless you're a local, you probably only know the town because of its more sinister claim to fame, the Amityville Horror. A brutal murder followed by claims of a haunting that was ultimately made into a Hollywood movie that would forever immortalize the town as the home of an infamous haunted house. But as Tim Mindham from Australian Skeptics points out, virtually none of it, other than the initial murders, was true.
Yeah, people try and look at Amityville from a lot of different aspects. The first thing you think about is every fact you've heard about Amityville is largely wrong or made up. But a recent article was looking at some of the influences that might help develop that, and looking at three films in particular that would sort of set the pattern for belief in Amityville. First one was a film called Castle Keep. I think it was late 60s film. Soldiers entering a German castle towards the end of the Second World War and all the nasty goings on there. This was a film that Ronald DeFeo watched a lot shortly before he killed his family. And Ronald DeFeo was the one from this Amityville house.
Yeah.
He shot them point blank, very nasty. He got caught pretty quickly and he admitted it, and he then used the Castle Keep to explain, that influenced me to do this stuff. I was under the spell of this movie. Someone's pointed out that movies don't make you go crazy, they help you think of ways of doing it.
Well, that's true, yeah.
That's a pretty true comment. That everyone says if you watch a movie you'll become a bad person. No, you're already a bad person, and a movie might help you manifest itself. Yeah, show you something interesting to do. Anyway, that's what he claimed. Probably untrue, highly likely untrue. So he was put in jail, and then later on, the film that created the whole genre, which is still around, is the Demon Possession, and that's The Exorcist, of course, which came out shortly after he was put in jail. Highly successful film, one of the most financially successful films ever, regardless of the genre. But it set this pattern of
also
a young innocent.
Also my favourite horror movie, because just the mood it gave you as you watched it. That scene where the priest is on the mound and he's looking across at the statue, this is in Iraqi desert, and he's looking across at the statue depicting an evil spirit, and the dogs are fighting in the background. That's brilliant. Yeah.
At that stage, William Friedkin was quite an interesting director, just shortly after French Connection, which is, again, he goes in for the everyday location and becomes weird. Very sort of ordinary sort of house in an ordinary sort of street in New York, I think it is.
Well, the French Connection is still used as a training film by the FBI for how to follow people without being seen.
Yeah. The Exorcist set the pattern for a demonic possession scenario. And DeFeo, the person who killed his family, picked it up very quickly and said, that's the reason why I killed them, not because I was influenced by this Castle Keep film, but because I was actually possessed. It became a handy excuse for a lot of people to do bad things. I was possessed, and The Exorcist was a very influential film from that point of view. Someone said it's the best advertisement for the Catholic Church has ever been. A lot of people feel very scared by the film. And therefore, that was influential. And what happened was that there was a fellow who was making those little documentaries, the making of that you see on DVDs as an extra.
Yeah.
This fellow did a making of The Exorcist. I thought, that's an interesting topic. And he wrote a book, heard about this DeFeo character, and heard about a family that bought the house. They couldn't afford it, apparently, but they bought the house, the Lutzes, and they left again pretty quickly. So he got onto them, talked with them, and said, this is a really good story. Let's write a book about it. And he did. There's Jay Anson wrote this book called The Amityville Horror. And in it, he makes a lot of statements about what the situation was, all the flies and the priest visiting and all the horror. He makes a lot of claims, most of which are not true, either exaggerated or they're not true, totally. The Lutzes were interested in this because they were a bit hard up for money, and they said, this is a way to make some money. Probably a bit rough to accuse them of that. But anyway, so they were working on another book with Anson, and they eventually split. They disagreed about financial matters, etc. But the Anson book became the source of the film, The Amityville Horror, which again took it even further in the horror fictional genre. And one of the things that Anson had put in his book, which was totally untrue, was that the house was built on a Native American cemetery. Burial place, highly sacred site. It wasn't. In fact, the tribe of Native Americans he quoted weren't there. It's a different tribe who was around there, but they say there's no indication that there was cemetery or funeral place here.
Come on, we all know that's the theme to Poltergeist as well.
Spanish not mentioned in Poltergeist.
I thought it
That's
was.
the thing. It becomes this trope, this idea that everything is built up. It's built on a cemetery, but not an Indian cemetery.
Right.
Big difference, you see.
Big difference.
So, but this idea of a Native American ancient burial ground as the source of demons and ghosts and possessions and things starts off with this Amityville Horror book in a popular way, and has now become just a commonplace belief. And the things the skeptics fight against is sort of say, well, go back to the original source and see if it was actually true. And it's not. DeFeo, who died a number of years ago, was quoting all these different things in different films as a source of an explanation for what he did. So these three films, Castle Keep, Exorcist, and the eventual Amityville Horror film, seem as being key to the Amityville myth for their associations with the story. And the people of Amityville hate the idea of this house because they say it's a nice
they had
town.
the shark to deal with, or that was just Amity, wasn't it?
That's Amity, yes, which is Martha's Vineyard in America. So Amityville has become famous as this haunted house. The famous psychic haunting investigators, the Warrens, investigated, and of course...
They've got their own record of flim-flam, haven't they?
Totally. There wasn't a haunted house they found that wasn't haunted. They made a lot of money and a lot of fame out of what they did, not necessarily of the people who were haunted, but all the associated stuff they were doing. And
they're still highly regarded by psychics.
Well, the films The Conjuring and the whole series are based on them, the Warrens, right? There's a number of things about an Enfield haunting in the UK, which involves the Warrens and the Enfield. And there's an Australian haunting that involved the Warrens, who were hardly there, and the same for the Enfield things. They turned up and then left again. Nowhere near as involved as the films make them out to be. And funny enough, like the Amityville Horror film and the Conjuring films, there's a lot of stuff that's made up and not true. So this whole meme of being buried on a Native American burial site largely comes, not entirely, but it's certainly made popular by the Amityville Horror and has become an accepted fact about many other places, and it's really not true. And the Montaukett Nation people, who was the actual Native Americans who lived around the area, said they are pretty displeased with this notion all the time. There are real burial grounds for Native American peoples, but they're known, they're not built upon, they're marked. To suggest that the Amityville house was built on one is totally made up, along with a lot of other stuff in the Amityville Horror.
That's Tim Mindham from Australian Skeptics. And that's the show for now. Spacetime is available every Monday, Wednesday and Friday through Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Pocket Casts, Spotify, Acast, Amazon Music, Bytes.com, SoundCloud, YouTube, your favourite podcast download provider, and from spacetimewithstuartgary.com. Spacetime's also broadcast through the National Science Foundation on Science Zone Radio and on both iHeartRadio and TuneIn Radio. And you can help to support our show by visiting the Spacetime store for a range of promotional merchandising goodies, or by becoming a Spacetime patron, which gives you access to triple-episode commercial-free versions of the show, as well as lots of bonus audio content which doesn't go to air, access to our exclusive Facebook group, and other rewards. Just go to spacetimewithstuartgary.com for full details. And if you want more space time, please check out our blog, where you'll find all the stuff we couldn't fit in the show, as well as heaps of images, news stories, loads of videos, and things on the web I find interesting or amusing. just go to spacetimewithstuartgary.tumblr.com. That's all one word, and that's Tumblr without the E. You can also follow us through @StuartGary on Twitter, @SpacetimeWithStuartGary on Instagram, through our Spacetime YouTube channel, and on Facebook, just go to facebook.com/Spacetime with Stuart Gary.
You've been listening to Spacetime with Stuart Gary. This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.